Alright guys, this is a horrible NES basketball game. All Pro Basketball might not be the worst NES basketball game, but man, it's up there. You've got this ridiculous graphics system where the game redraws the entire screen once you make it past the half-court line. Shooting percentages in this game are just awful. It's really a game of dunks. And of course, there's really no way to play defense. I mean, this game is bad. This game is so bad that you don't even want to know. This might not be as bad as Ultimate Basketball, which is the ultimate bad NES basketball game, but this game is still really, really bad. I mean, I had to force myself to play just to get through a full game of this, and I'm never, ever touching this game again. But the thing about this game is that it's more than just, a crappy game. There's a story behind this game that I certainly wasn't expecting to find. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world anybody could find an interesting story behind such an awful NES game. And no, the story has nothing to do with the names of the teams in this game, though they are pretty creative, I'll give you that. As confusing and honestly boring as this game might be, at least it's different than the other NES basketball games. And that's really where the interesting part of this story comes in. Now, this game was published by a company called Vic Tokai, sure, but it was actually programmed by a different company. This is a company called Aicom. And Aicom is responsible for no fewer than 3 of the basketball games on the NES. This is kind of confusing since the company that actually programmed the game is nowhere to be found on either the cartridge or the in-game credits. The same is true for the other 2 NES basketball games that were made by Aicom. Ultimate Basketball, for example, was published by a company called Sammy. And of course, Hoops was published by Jalico, even though it was also created by Aicom. So how did this happen? How in the world is it possible for the same company to create different basketball games that are published by entirely different companies? And why would this happen? Well, let's look into it. The thing is that it was pretty common for NES cartridge publishers to have nothing to do with the actual programming of the game. So for example, this game is Bump and Jump. This is a pretty crappy car game that was published by Vic Tokai back in December 1988. All of the zany antics of crashing into a brick wall come to us courtesy of Data East. That's the company that originally developed the arcade game. And the NES port comes courtesy of a company called Sakta SAS, which makes all of this even more complicated. So basically, the way that this worked is Data East created the original game, then this Sakata SAS company worked on the NES-specific port of the game, and Vic Tokai wound up being the only company to get the credit, on the box and stuff like that. So you've got 3 companies here with skin in the game, and all of this was for a really crappy NES game that nobody wants to play anyway. I mean, it's kind of cool since you get points for causing cars to crash and stuff, but you need to learn how to make your car jump if you want to get anywhere in the game. And your only attack is to ram cars into the wall. You can't, shoot or anything like that. Plus, this game has this really annoying title screen that will probably give you a seizure. Compare that with Spy Hunter, which is still not a great game, but at least it's a little bit better. You either go way too fast or way too slow in this one. But hey, at least you can shoot. Now, the confusing thing about all of this is that companies like Vic Tokai actually were able to create their own games in-house. It's just that these games were really, really bad. So for example, you've got this absolute piece of garbage, Kid Cool, which is mostly famous for the Angry Video Game Nerd episode. The idea here seems to have been to mix some RPG elements together with really awful platforming gameplay. And I mean it when I say that this is an awful platformer. This is one of the worst I've ever played. I swear, this game gives you the middle finger at every opportunity. And this is only the first level of the game. So once you've actually played Kid Cool, I think you'll get an idea as to why Vic Tokai decided to go with a contractor to help it out. But the thing that I will never get over is just how bad the Aicom basketball games really are. So the first game was Hoops, which I've already made a couple of videos about. If you play Hoops for just a few minutes, you'll realize right away that All Pro Basketball really was made by the same company. The only real difference is that you've got 5 players in All Pro Basketball instead of 1 or 2. Well, that, plus the fact that Hoops is actually kind of fun to play, especially multiplayer. So Hoops came first, and then All Pro Basketball came out a year later. And I've really got to hand it to Aicom. These two games really are completely different. I mean, this could have been a lot worse. Aicom then came out with Ultimate Basketball in late 1990, and this is easily the worst of the NES basketball games. It feels like the company was behind and had to come up with something really quick to make a deadline. Everything in this game is a pain, and it's hard to hold on to the ball long enough to even get a shot off. And defense in Ultimate Basketball is simply impossible. But then again, it's not like All Pro Basketball is an amazing defensive game either. Now the thing you've got to understand is that Aicom was making all sorts of games for all sorts of companies. These guys were really just a team of coders, you know, a bunch of geeks who happened to have like an idea for how to make a basketball game, and that's the reason why these other companies were asking them to make basketball games, right? The thing is that Aicom did have some non-basketball games as well, and when you start playing these games, you'll realize that the company was basically like reusing its own programming assets all over the place. This, for example, is Robo Warrior with one of the coolest introduction screens in NES history. The game itself is a Bomberman clone, except that it totally sucks. It's basically Bomberman without the square tiles, and the bombs explode way too fast. Now the thing that's really bizarre here is that Hudson Soft, the company behind Bomberman, also made this game, right? In part, at least. And this is where stuff gets really kind of weird. Okay, one thing is for certain. The original Bomberman is one of the best NES games of all time. Of all of the games I played for this video, I spent most of my time playing Bomberman because it was the most fun. Now, you should know that this is one of those NES hard games, since you still have to find the exit before time runs out even after you kill all the bad guys. But this game really is extremely satisfying, and 2-player mode never grows old. Anyway, this is where it gets really confusing, so pay attention. Bomberman first came out on the Famicom back in December 1985. That's not long after the first Super Mario Bros. Game. It was one of those extremely simple and very small NES games. This is the sort of game that you love to play because it's so simple and easy. For reasons I don't understand, the NES version, that is in North America, didn't come out until 1989, even though the game has a 1987 copyright date, go figure. Meanwhile, Hudson Soft had created this game called Bomber King in Japan, which came out in 1987, and for some reason they needed help from Aicom. Anyway, that game came out in North America as Robo Warrior, and actually came out before Bomberman, which makes no sense to me at all. Well, whatever the logic is, in North America we got the really crappy game first. And you can tell that this is an Aicom game just by watching what the characters do. The robot in Robo Warrior looks like he's always walking in place no matter what he's doing. This is exactly the same as Ultimate Basketball. The players in these Aicom games simply cannot stand still. It's like they've got an awful case of ADHD. Anyway, Bomber King, or whatever it's called, is not the only crappy Aicom game. There are a couple of others that I'll show you briefly. For example, this is Chugoku Senseijutsu, a fortune-telling game that Aicom programmed and Jaleco published. You're supposed to program in different female and male characters, though I didn't really do a good job of that. Here, for example, I can see if my female character would be a good marriage match with one of the male characters I never entered data for. The female character was born in 1980, and all of the men were born on January 1st, 1900. The fortune-telling machine starts off with all sorts of suspense. But look at this, it's true love. And here it tells us all about how their personalities match or whatever. Okay, so this game came out in November 1988. So that girl born in 1980 would have been like 8 years old, and she was together with a man 80 years older than her? Yeah, that's not just disgusting, it's insane. So shame on you, Aicom. Anyway, that game obviously never came out in North America for obvious reasons. There are a few other Aicom games, however, that you may or may not actually know something about. This is Totsuzen Macho Man, also known as Amagon in North America. And no, I've never heard of this game before either. Anyway, this is a crappy jump and shoot game. It's kind of like Kid Cool, except you have a gun. It's really not that this game is awful, it just is what it is. Anyway, screw this, I'm gonna go back and play more Bomberman. And there was one other Aicom game that I'm sure all of you have heard of before, even though it hasn't really aged all that well. This is Vice Project Doom, which is actually one of the better Aicom creations. So there's this big cinematic storyline, which was honestly pretty ambitious for an NES game, even in late 1991. You start off with this driving stage. Oh, and look at this, you can actually shoot a weapon. And then you've got this crappy platforming stage. Anyway, I really suck at this game, so I didn't get very far, but you get the idea. And yeah, I know we're kind of getting off the subject, but you do see the pattern here, right? So Aicom was all about making games for other companies. The business model, in other words, was to pick up as many contracts as it possibly could. Now, I will give the company credit for not reusing the exact same basketball game over and over again, right? At least there was some creativity. But my feeling is that so many companies went to Aicom because they knew that kids in North America really wanted to play sports games, and Aicom was like the only company that had some idea as to what to do for a sports game. In fact, one of the most surprising things I found was that one of the early TurboGrafx basketball games was also made by Aicom. This is USA Pro Basketball, also known as Taking It to the Hoop in North America. This game is basically Ultimate Basketball, except that the players look like they came out of a horror movie. I mean, the 16-bit effects are kind of cool, but seriously, the eyes on these guys really just creep me out. This game has the same cutscenes as Ultimate Basketball, except I think you're supposed to push the button where the cursor is in the green area. I don't know. I'm not even interested enough to really find out. Anyway, in this game, it is impossible to play defense, and the game pretty much sucks. Anyway, so you can see that Aicom never really learned its lesson when it came to sports games. It came out with 4 basketball games at all, and all in all, they're pretty awful. Hoops is at least playable, the other ones are really bad. But what you probably didn't know is that Aicom also came out with a football game. This is Football Fury, which was published by American Sammy on the Super Nintendo, and man, this game really sucks. I mean, they've got the NFL cities right, so I'll give them credit for that, I guess. You've got a bunch of formations and plays to choose from, which is better than a lot of NES football games I've played. The play control is awkward, however, and it just feels strange. The best part about this game is that it's actually pretty easy to pass. Unfortunately, you keep changing players automatically on defense, which really sucks. And believe it or not, this game was originally called Ultimate Football in Japan. Yeah, they called it Ultimate Football in Japan. This goes to show you that Aicom and Sammy never learned that Ultimate Basketball was actually one of the worst NES sports games of all time. You would think that they would want to stay away from any connection to that garbage. Anyway, Football Fury honestly is not that bad of a game, though it really doesn't feel like a 16-bit game. After a few years of coming out with crappy games, Aicom finally decided to change its name and logo. The company changed names to Umebo, which means something like Dream Factory, and it was as Umebo that Aicom came out with its all-time best game. Now, I think that this game was Aicom's last game, or Umebo, or whatever it's called. I'm not entirely sure on that. This is kind of what I was able to find after doing research online. If you know of any other games they came out with after this one, just leave me a comment. Anyway, that game was SNK Gal Fighters on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Honestly, this game isn't exactly a masterpiece of high-class technology, and it feels kind of dated today. However, like Bomberman, the game works well because it's a lot of fun to play. The fighting system is actually pretty advanced for a portable game from the mid-90s, and I can see myself playing this one again. And trust me, this is a heck of a lot more interesting than stupid All-Pro Basketball. Anyway, like I told you, the backstory behind all of this is actually really interesting, right? Umebo wound up kind of like disappearing, and the legacy of Aicom was obscured over time. Until now, that is. Anyway, All-Pro Basketball on the NES still really sucks. The music is bad enough, and the gameplay is simply horrible. But at least there's an interesting story behind the company and all of this ridiculousness. And hey, at least it's better than Ultimate Basketball. I mean, they did the absolute bare minimum, right? Aicom is strange because its basketball games actually got progressively worse as time went on. It makes me wonder if they didn't, like fire everybody who was competent to try to keep their costs down, which sounds like a lot of these video game contracting companies. Anyway, that's All Pro Basketball for you. Now do yourself a favor and pretend that this game never existed.